Welcome on to the next episode of the Faster Beyond 50 podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about how to plan your year with regards to races and how to maintain between races when it comes to your training. We're going to talk about incorporating cycling into your running training, how to know how much nutrition to take on runs, and whether or not we should believe the VO2 max numbers our watches are spitting out. We've got the coach, Lindsey Parry, with us once again. My name is Brad Nadauld. Lindsey, great to catch up. I love these Q&A episodes. How are things going? Are you well?
Yeah, pretty good. Thanks, Brad.
Cool stuff. Well, let's get into the first of the questions. And don't forget, if you have a question you'd like answered, all you need to do is click on the link that's in the description of this podcast or in the description of the video of this that you're watching. You can click through there. We do filter the video questions to the top. We love seeing and hearing you. Let us know where you're from and what you're training for, and then shoot your question as well. And that's exactly what Bill did.
Run a half marathon, which I'm ready for. I'm finding a race to do that in. I'm ready to do that. After that, and I'm on your program for, I think, another 5 months or so. My next goal is long range, a marathon toward the end of 2025. So I'm trying to come up with a plan to fill in that almost 12-month period that makes sense. Maybe periodic races throughout that fairly long period of time. Anyway, that's what I'm getting ready to get into. And so I could use some guidance on that. Thank you very much.
I love that, Lindsey, because it's just not possible to be at peak training all the time, training for events. How do you go about, as Bill said, sort of planning out a year and a long-term plan? And maybe there's a period within there where you're not actually training for a race. What do you do to maintain the gains that you've made? Or do you need to take a whole bunch of time off? What advice have you got for Bill?
Yeah, so that's the crux there. So Bill was alluding to the fact that he's just come out of preparation for something. So we don't know whether that's a marathon or a half or maybe a 10, but
it was a half marathon. So
yeah, so that is always the key. So I'll answer his question more specifically for him, but just sort of in general, it's like, right, what have we just come out of? Because you're spot on, Brad. We can't train at full tilt for 12 months of the year. That's the first point. And two, the race that we've prepared for and that we do is going to cause a certain amount of damage. So we've both got the mental aspect of having been disciplined, trained really hard. So we need a little bit of a break from that. And then we've got the physical damage that is different whether you've been targeting a 5, 10, 21 or a marathon. So that's kind of the first thing to look at is our big race is a year away. So how do I keep myself motivated for that full period of time? And what are the best things for me to do in the short, medium, and then slightly longer term to get to that race? So straight after a race, half marathons and longer, I would say that there is a fair bit of mental fatigue. So in the immediate aftermath of that, we want to take a little bit of time off. And obviously, the more physical damage that's done, the more time we need to take off running. But we also know that if we take too long off running, we're going to lose some of that hard-earned fitness. So typically, we would do a week of nothing, 1 week of a bit of mobility, cross-training, and then hopefully by week 3, you're good to go and start training. Certainly after a half marathon, so in Bill's case, what I would look to do here is to have one of two choices. Okay. So how did my race go? And what are the areas that I feel like I can benefit from being better at? So if I ran a pretty good race, but I felt like my weakness was my speed, I would probably then look to work to something along the lines of a 5 kilometer or a 10 kilometer plan so that I can keep the volume a little bit lower so that I don't build up too much mental fatigue early in this year. But I'm working towards something specific and making myself faster. And what we know is that if we improve our 5 and 10K times, that'll improve our half marathon time, which ultimately leads to a better marathon time. Or the other alternative is that I would want to try and maintain my fitness quite well, again, focusing on this idea of staying fit but staying mentally fresh. And then I would look to something along the lines of a maintenance plan for 8 to 12 weeks, which would essentially allow me to really just build a nice solid foundation, or a base, for lack of a better terminology, and it'll keep a little bit of the speed element in there. So our maintenance plans will maintain our fitness, maintain a bit of coordination with a couple of shorter intervals, 1 or 2 slightly longer things. So those are kind of your first 8 to 12 weeks. I would follow one of those 2 roads. Then for the rest of the year, I'd be a little bit more intentional. I'd go, right, what are the things that are going to help me build up towards ultimately running my best marathon? If I haven't worked on the shorter speed yet, that's what I would do first. Okay. If I have worked on the shorter speed, then I'd probably ratchet up. So if I'd worked on the 5K, now I'd move towards the 10K. And if I've been on the maintenance, I would definitely then go into this 5K. So I would definitely there have a block of 12 weeks. Now I'm intentionally working on speed. My training is a bit more formal, but I'm still not at the really high, big sort of marathon training block type things. Then my pre-marathon training block, I would go into a half marathon plan. So now we build up volume. There's a little bit of a specific look in speed and maybe some tempo and threshold work. But what I wouldn't do if I have this main race as a marathon is that I wouldn't plan a half marathon race for the end of the block. I might still do a 5K time trial or a 10K race, some kind of race to show me that I've improved and the training's going well, but I wouldn't want a half marathon because I don't want to be both physically and mentally beat up. So the half marathon plan will allow you to build up to a really nice level. Then it will allow a taper and freshening up, but no race. So that means we will have physically and mentally recovered from that training cycle and be ready to go straight into our marathon training cycle. And then you'll build that marathon out for 12 weeks. And that will leave you to really dial in on that one event 12 months away.
What a great question, Bill. I love that. And just so that you know as well, we are going to be doing a deep dive on exactly that, on periodization and planning out a year. Obviously, we're coming up to the start of a brand new year. A lot of people are reassessing goals. So we are going to have that on this podcast feed within the next few weeks. So make sure you look out for that, a real deep dive into periodization, which is going to be fantastic. Great question. Don't forget, if you have a question you'd like to submit, click on the link in the description of this podcast player that you're listening on, or on YouTube in the description. And you can ask your question. And like I said, we filter the video questions up to the top. So thanks for doing that, Bill. Question from Janine. Lindsey, Janine says, I'm starting to incorporate more biking in my life, things like commuting to work, entering longer gravel bike events. But what I also want to do is keep my running up. Sometimes I need to choose a bike ride over a run training session. Do you advise, do you have advice rather, for balancing the two? For example, if time dictates a ride over a run, is it best to replace an easy run or a higher intensity speed session? She says, thank you. Love what you do. It's made an immense positive difference in my life. Thank you very much for listening, Janine. We appreciate you as well. Lindsey, a great question about cycling and running. How do you incorporate the two? And if one's got to go, which one is it?
So I really like and dislike these types of questions because on the one hand, it's a great question, full stop. But on the other hand, it does show that there's never one correct answer here. And it depends on a couple of things. And that's just true of so much when it comes to coaching and being physically prepared. So let's start with which sessions should you swap out, and that is just so heavily dependent on specifically what you are training for in that moment in time, and how important the relative events are. Okay, so if you are training very specifically for a bike race and you are wanting to keep your toe in the running water and you don't want to lose much, then the running will contribute greatly towards the cycling. And if the cycling is the main thing, then absolutely you can replace high intensity run sessions with high intensity bike sessions because they're going to be much more specific to what you are doing. However, if the cycling is really more about contributing to the running, and yes, you've got these bike races that you're potentially doing, the bike races themselves aren't actually that important to you in terms of the results, then I wouldn't do away with the high intensity running sessions because of the importance that they bring from the coordination point of view as we are getting older. And so then I would replace one of your easy runs with the cycling session. Of course, if the question is that it's a high intensity cycling session, we also have to then make sure that we place the high intensity run apart from each other so that they don't compromise each other or the overall plan, so that you don't get too tired and that you aren't struggling to recover from your session. So that would then turn into a little bit of a cat and mouse, do it and see how you feel. Possibly down the line, that would mean alternating one hard cycle, one hard run, so every second week. So those are kind of some of the solutions that you can get through. By and large, cycling is very complementary to running. So, if you're currently running 4 times a week and you ditch one of the easy runs, but you're bringing in 2 cycles a week, for example, that will absolutely more than compensate for that lost run. So you're really not going to be losing much, if anything. And of course, what you do want to do when you are trying to incorporate now 2 sports into a week is just make sure that you don't lose sight of the need to do strength training, because for your long-term success, strength training is just so important. You will get away with it in the short term. In some ways, it might even feel like the cycling is compensating for the loss of that strength training, but it can't. If you don't do the strength training, it's a matter of months before things just start to fall apart. And the longer you go without strength training, the more of a problem you make it. So at the end of the day, it all comes down, balance is a fallacy, but it comes down to getting as close to a balance as we can get.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Janine. Thank you so much for that. Lindsey, question from Lee. We've got such a mixed bag of questions on today's, which is brilliant. Lee says, hi there. So there's energy gels, energy drinks, electrolytes, chews, and other stuff to make up the carb intake during a marathon. I'd like to complete marathon under 5 hours. How much of these electrolytes and gels should I be taking per hour, and what products do you recommend? We don't really get into recommending products because everyone's different, obviously taste palettes and the way you the way you digest things, but there is like rule of thumb with regards to grams of carbs. What's the best way to go about fueling for a marathon when it comes to using these products, Lindsey? If you're over 50 and want to recover from sessions faster, run pain and injury-free, and improve your endurance, then be sure to join Lindsey and I for our upcoming Faster Beyond 50 Masterclass. In it, we'll show you how we helped a 70-year-old run a 47-minute, 18-second 10K, and how you can take those exact same principles and apply them in your training. Simply scan the QR code that's on screen right now, or click on the link in the description below to save your seat in the training now. We look forward to seeing you there.
Right, how big is your backpack? I think that's the ultimate question. No, I'm just kidding. So look, a really nice rule of thumb is to say, right, I need approximately 1 gram of carbohydrates per kg of body mass. Now that is difficult because that's very different for someone who's 60 grams and someone who's 60 grams, someone who's 60 kgs and someone who weighs 90 or 100 kilograms. That is an enormous difference. And so we need to figure out, how do we get close to these numbers, number one, and do we need all of that? And so I have got a little equation that I use, and that is, have a look at the breakfast that you are eating. Go onto the internet and Google how many grams of carbohydrates you're getting out of that specific breakfast. If you're eating cereals or pre-mixed shakes or things like that, then it's easy because it'll tell you how many grams per 100 mils. You work out how much you are actually having, and that'll give you a carbohydrate component. Then on the way to the race, or while you're waiting around in the starting pens, generally for half an hour before that race, you can slowly sip. I can't speak English today, Brad. You can slowly sip on an energy drink or take in an energy product, a bar, something that's a little bit more solid. And once again, you can look at the back of the packaging. You can see how many carbohydrates you are going to consume. And then you can do a little bit of guesstimation. And if you are a 80 kg human being, you can say that you've probably got in the region of 120 plus minus 120 grams of stored. Okay, so if we add up our breakfast, we add up what we're going into the race with, and we then add up our 120 grams, that's going to give you a number. Let's call that 300 grams. Okay, now you want to run a 5 hour, and let's say you weigh 80 kg, so we stick to the same number. That's 400 grams of carbohydrates that you need for all of that time. We know that we are sitting here on maybe 200 that we have taken in before. So 400 minus 200, we need to take in 200 grams of carbohydrates during those 5 hours. So you're looking at roughly 40 grams per hour. Then you can start working out, how can I practically get in 40 grams per hour? Well, if I have a gel an hour and 300 fluids, 300 mils of Gatorade, for example, that'll be 21 plus 26 grams on most gels are in the 23 to 26 gram range, plus your 21 grams that you're getting from 300 mils over the hour. That takes you to 41 grams. So I promise I didn't plan this before. This is just working out quite smoothly as I'm talking my way through it. But that isn't an insignificant amount. I mean, even though I'm making that sound really easy, that's not an insignificant amount. And very importantly, you have to find the right flavor profiles. If the race you're running in has Gatorade, you got to practice Gatorade. If it's got Coca-Cola, you got to practice Coca-Cola. If it's got Powerade, if it's got whatever products they're handing out. Because if you don't use what's on the road, it means you're going to carry the rest. So you could get it all from gels, but then you have to carry 10 gels. So those are the kind of decisions you've got to make, and you've got to practice that. So you've got to practice the morning routine as well as the in-race nutrition. Otherwise, you know what you've got to do. You've never tried it before. You get there on race day and you get 10 miles in and you're feeling horrendous and you're like, I can't stomach another gel, or you start throwing up just because your body is not used to consuming those amounts of sugars, or you hate the flavor of the gel that you bought because you've never tried a gel before. So watermelon sounded wonderful when you bought it, but now that you're trying to eat it, it's just horrible.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't have to come from those things either, Lindsey. It could be a banana. It could be a sort of baby potato. So that's also can be factored into those equations. And then just for transparency, I know you like, from a brand perspective, you're a huge fan of Morton. You've tried pretty much everything on the market and that works for you. I've been using goo gels for the longest while, but the last marathon I ran, they didn't sit well with me for some weird reason. So I'm now back on the market looking for something else to try and test and see what works for me. So yeah, it is a very individual thing, and that's why there are probably so many different brands of nutrition companies creating these things, because not every person is exactly the same, and what works for me won't work for Lindsey, and what works for Lindsey won't work for me. So I think that is probably the best way to go about it. Great question, Lee. Thank you for submitting that. Question from Jim, Lindsey. This is a wonderful question. Jim says, thank you for the helpful information that you share. I'm a few weeks out from a half marathon. I've been training for the last 4 months. I've been using the Garmin Coach half marathon 4-day a week training plan. My VO2 max was slightly increasing, but mostly maintaining. I'm 2 weeks out before the race, and my VO2 max has been dropping. It's now 3 points less than it was just a few weeks ago, and I rarely miss a training session and hit the suggested times. I feel less confident than I did a few weeks ago. Is this something to stress over? Great question from Jim, because these watches spit out sort of targets and numbers, and let's talk VO2 max, and he's obviously using Garmin. Does it actually is it a fair reflection of where we're at, and should we be getting stressed out when these numbers drop as we head closer to a race, for an example?
So It's incredible for me that we can be so advanced in technology and then not look at something when we're using it and just see like the obvious flaw. So VO2 max is an indirect kind of measure, and it's firstly not accurate, but the most important thing about where I'm trying to go with this is that it's supposed to motivate you. And so it's built in a way that says, okay, as training load goes up, we are going to basically increase your VO2 max. So it keeps you motivated while you're training. Now, if you want someone to follow your training plan, you would kind of think like, well, what's another metric we can use to counterbalance that so that when we taper, this number doesn't fall through the floor and we have people panicking about the fact that they're losing fitness? Because how's someone going to buy into tapering and freshening up if their VO2 is tanking? Because in their mind, that's a sign that they are now detraining, losing fitness, and it's going to impact on race day. So the first and most important thing is it's a derived number that's based on a couple of parameters, and they all use slightly different parameters to get to that number. And so I guess in some ways it's not a terrible measurement of progress in fitness, but once you start tapering, there is no allowance for how the freshness counteracts some of the minor loss of fitness that takes place in those last 2 weeks. And so for that reason, I actually try not to let people even look at VO2 or the race time predictions on their GPS units. It's not a reflection of reality and what's really happening inside you. Some of the platforms do have a counter to this. So you've got Training Peaks, and a lot of platforms use a very similar tool to what Training Peaks uses. But that's to say that you've got this blue line of chronic fatigue that builds up, and that starts to come down. But then you also have an orange line which shows you where you are from a freshness perspective. And then they've got some recommendations there around what sort of numbers you are targeting to be at a good balance between freshness and like losing fitness, I guess, is the only way that I can say it. And so, if you're down in the minus whatevers, that you've got a high degree of fatigue, and that's not great. So once you get into the pluses, that's where you want to be, but we don't want to be at plus 20, 30, because then maybe you've overdone the tape a little bit. But my point just being that there are other systems that you can use to objectively figure it out. Typically, when you're following a plan, it does factor in and allow for some freshening up. And so, you followed this plan through, you were feeling good not so long ago. Really, the only reason you're not feeling good now is because your watch is telling you that you shouldn't be feeling good. But the reality is that it's so important to get your best performance on race day to actually freshen up. And so I think you'll be just fine, and don't put any stock in that VO2.
Yeah, Lindsey, I have to laugh. As you were explaining that, it just jogged a memory that I sent you a screen grab from my Strava just a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, I just ran a marathon, and I was I'd done the recovery that you suggested and not run for a little while. And one of my first runs back, I was really struggling. Coming out of this marathon, I've had a lot more fatigue than I've had in previous marathons. I did push quite hard on the marathon. And Strava's got that little athlete intelligence thing that they're now looking at your workout and telling you what it thinks you've done. And it was supposed to be an easy run. So it was scheduled. It was an easy run. My pace was a lot slower than what previous runs at an easy run, sort of the way it should feel, because my heart rate was so high. I was really, really struggling, right? So on paper, this workout was horrendous. I felt terrible. My heart rate was high. It was way slower than I've normally done. And I'll read what Strava's athlete intelligence said about this. It said, your latest run was slower than usual. You pushed your heart rate to new heights, showing strong fitness. Because that's what I wanted out of that run, wasn't it? It was supposed to be an easy run. And that's exactly the point. There's these things are built on algorithms. And yes, there's lots of great information that you can glean from these things. But man alive, that should make me feel great. My heart rate on an easy run, I've pushed it. I'm feeling fantastic, according to Strava. I felt horrid, like absolutely horrid in that run. So yeah, don't put too much stock in these things. They're great as a guide, and when they tell you you're wonderful, take it to heart. But if they're telling you terrible, I nearly used a different word, then like just ignore them. That's pretty much what it wants to be. But that's a great example. Yeah, best of luck for that half marathon. Jim, let us know how it goes. And yeah, in future, if you do want to touch base with a coach or have a training plan where you do get access to a coach to bounce these things off, do definitely check out what we do. The Fast to Beyond 50 master plan is fantastic, especially for runners over the age of 50. And then, Lindsey, question from Sunitha. Sunitha saying, I'm 54 years old. I want to get back to running. It's been nearly 6 months that I haven't been doing anything hard. It's either taking a leisurely walk, the dog type walk, or some yoga. I want to get back on the horse again, but I'm really scared of how my body will respond. I can't recover fast from injury, pain, and discomfort, but I feel like I'm missing out on the best days of my life, which has been me time with running. What advice can you give to Samitha to get back to running sensibly, pain-free, and injury-free now that she's in her mid-50s?
Yeah, she really needs to treat herself as a beginner. So that is something that I'm seeing a lot, because the reason why she stopped from just some reading a little bit between the lines is because of this discomfort, pain, injury cycle. So the only way back there, treat yourself like a beginner. You're going to walk more than you're going to run at the start, and you're going to slowly transition from more walking to less walking, and from less running to more running. That's going to be your transition. Something on our platform we call the Start Out Right plan, and you're going to focus on strength training while you do it. And that's going to be the key to just allowing you to build up. So you've got the slow building up, which is doing some strengthening of the soft tissues, but you're going to actually intentionally strengthen those soft tissues by doing the right strength training 2 to 3 times a week. You get nice and strong, slowly build up your fitness. And if you do it that way around, you'll probably be running fairly consistently between 5 and 8 kilometers, 3 to just over 5 miles, 3 to 4 times a week, actually, more realistically. And that will then give you the platform to go, right, I would like to participate regularly in 5K park runs, or I'd like to train for a 10K, or I'd like to train for a half marathon. But if you do that for the first 8 to 12 weeks, just that slow, gradual build up, you're back to really enjoying your running. It will be pain and injury free. You'll be nice and strong from the strength training for even your normal activities of daily living, taking the dog for a walk, playing with the grandkids if you've got any, doing the gardening and chores around the house. Everything will just feel better, and then you can get back into running more consistently.
Yeah, absolutely. Smith, if you need help with that and a plan to get you back onto that sort of trajectory, you can click on the link that's on screen right now and check out our Fast to Beyond 50 training plans. You can also click on the link that's in the description of this podcast, whether you're listening to it on a podcast player or on YouTube. You can click through. Lindsey, as always, great to catch up. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget, if you have a question you'd like answered, click on that link in the description as well. We look forward to answering yours on an upcoming episode.